Okay, I assume people can hear me. If not, please mention it in the chat. In fact, actually, could somebody type in the chat if you can hear me? Daniel is typing now. I assume you can then. Good. Okay. Right. Hi there. Thanks for joining. My name's Matthew Haywood, and I work at Blockstream, where I'm the product manager for Blockstream AMP, which stands for Asset Management Platform, in case you were wondering. I think the format, if I remember from the last one I did on Elements, is that I'll present and then Daniel will kindly collect questions if there are any when we go along from the chat panel, and then I'll try and answer those at the end. So in this webinar, I'll give a presentation and then I'll be showing some extra resources at the end. I'll give an overview of what Blockstream AMP is and the use cases and asset types it supports. Before I do this, I'll quickly explain how Liquid itself handles issued assets and uses financial transactions, and how AMP sits between Liquid and Blockstream Green. And in case you didn't know, Blockstream Green is our wallet solution for Bitcoin and also liquid assets. So I'll explain how AMP makes use of Green's 2 of 2 multi-signature wallet setup to allow issuers to view and restrict ownership of liquid issued assets. And we'll take a look at a few existing case studies, which we have on AMP, to see how these work in practice. And and then, as I said, after the slides, we'll take a look at some examples and documentation for AMP. And finally, if there's time, I'll use the Green desktop app and a demo site we put together that uses the AMP API to show how an issuer can restrict and track balances for AMP issued assets. And I should explain that AMP is currently available as an API, so that it can be integrated into the existing services of asset issuers and service providers. Okay. So what is Blockstream AMP? Well, AMP stands for Asset Management Platform. And as this slide says, it's a comprehensive API for issuing and managing regulated and unregulated issued assets on the Liquid network. And it uses a tracking and authorization features, and it's perfect for the issuance of stablecoins or security tokens and attested assets, for example, gold-backed tokens. So there are 2 types of asset the issue using Blockstream AMP. And I'll set out later, but at a high level there, issuer tracked assets and investor or owner restricted assets. We'll come to those later. Also to note that I'll probably be using the words asset and token interchangeably here, but you can consider the 2 things the same for the purpose of this webinar. It really depends on what you are issuing and what your use case is. So before we go on to look at how AMP's application layer sits between Liquid and Green to enable all these assets to be managed, we'll take a look at normal Liquid issued assets for a bit of background. So if you didn't already know, Liquid is a Bitcoin sidechain. It allows you to peg in Bitcoin, which basically means move Bitcoin into the Liquid network, where those Bitcoin then become available as Liquid Bitcoin, LBTC, which is the native asset of the Liquid network, and can be moved around between exchanges or between nodes and wallets. And it's also used to pay fees on the network as well. So once you have your Bitcoin within the Liquid network, you can benefit from some of the sidechain's features, such as fast settlement of transactions and confidential transactions. More details of the benefits and trade-offs of Liquid can be found on the blockstream.com website. For now, I'd like to mention another feature of Liquid, and that's issued assets. So anyone can run a Liquid node and connect the live Liquid network and validate the supply of Liquid Bitcoin, verify that it's backed one-to-one with the Bitcoin that was pegged in. Another thing that you can do on Liquid, if you run a Liquid node, is issue your own assets on the network. All you need to do is run one command against your node, and suddenly you've your own asset. Simple. Now that asset can be sent to anyone else on the Liquid network, or you can use something like our atomic swap tool to directly exchange assets for LBTC or assets for each other, all without restrictions, no permission required, and all covered by confidential transactions. So that's normal liquid issued assets. So although this is easy to do and anyone can do it without requiring permission, there are types of asset a user might want to issue that don't lend themselves well to this open, send to anyone approach to asset or token issuance. For example, regulated security tokens or assets where the issuer wants to know who or what when. These kind of assets are perhaps needed if the issuer wants to issue a token that pays a dividend or a reward to its holders. For example, the issuer needs to know who held the token at a certain point in time so they can pay out the dividend or reward. So when such restrictions or ownership or knowledge of ownership are needed, people have been issuing tokens on existing platforms and trying to configure them to meet these regulatory or business requirements. A popular platform for this has been Ethereum, which uses the Ethereum base layer and complex smart contracts to enforce issuers' rules and requirements. So that's been popular, but because everything's on the Ethereum base layer and everything competes with everything else for block space, like the recent DeFi craze, for example, this pushes up fees and they're expensive to trade for some users. And also been more than a couple of instances where smart contracts have bugs or flaws in them that lock up or have lost user funds. In all cases, the actions are also public and not confidential. So that's a potential downside there for anybody wishing to trade the tokens on the exchange, for example. So Liquid, being a sidechain, isn't limited by the Bitcoin main chain, or indeed doesn't place any encumbrance on Bitcoin itself, and has been designed to offer fast, reliable, confidential transactions. Now, AMP makes use of liquid issued assets by issuing them in such a way that they can be registered with Blockstream Green as a managed asset. So AMP then uses Green's 2 of 2 multi-signature rules and its view of the issuer's asset to enable the issuer to follow ownership of the asset as it moves around the blockchain, and also, if needed, restrict who can hold it, or depends on what relations apply to the asset or token that the issuer is issuing there. So configuring token rules a lot easier and safer than trying to author new smart contracts, and there's no risk of chain split, as Liquid's protocol and federated block signing model were designed to prevent this in the first place. In this way, AMP sort of harnesses the power of Liquid issued assets in combination with Green's multi-sig wallet to enable new types of asset to be issued and managed, all via a simple to use API, and all benefiting from privacy provided by confidential transactions. So although the issuer and the holders individually can see what balance they hold, nobody on the public Liquid blockchain can see, because all the transactions are covered by confidential transactions. The issuer is only able to view this because of the way that AMP works with Green, requiring signature before the transaction is broadcast and after various checks have been performed. I'll be covering that in a bit more detail, how AMP actually works, how the process works later. So issuing assets on Blockstream AMP, whether they're regulated tokens or just assets backed by something else, is simple to do and simple to update and manage. There's no complex smart contracts to configure, and the issued assets or tokens are supported by Liquid wallets such as Blockstream Green, mobile and desktop. Oh, and you can also build or integrate your own wallet process within by using the Green Development Kit, which we'll take a quick look at in later on when we look at the Blockstream Docs site. And so using GDK allows you to automate wallet processes, on a server or in service you may already have. Or most users will probably hold it within their desktop or an asset within their desktop or mobile Green app. So now we can get into some more details of the features of AMP. So I'm not going to read from these slides. I'll just talk around the different as they're listed. So Blockstream AMP, there's multi-signature authorization. So what this essentially means is if you're the asset issuer and you distribute the asset to, let's say, 100 different investors who you've registered up front with Blockstream, those investors will only be able to send to other registered investors if you're using that type of asset. So the way that the restriction works is that Blockstream Green will have registered this asset as a type of Blockstream AMP asset, and each time a user tries to transact it, it will actually ping the details over to the Blockstream AMP, which then checks the configuration that the issuer has put in place, and it either allows the transaction to go through or not based on the category-based restrictions. So the categories can quite simply be thought of. You might create a category of approved KYC checked users and add people into that category as they go through the KYC process, and then associate that category with the asset. As soon as you've done that, those the relevant users there can transact and hold the asset. Now there is another type of asset. I said we'll come on to the different types of asset later, but there's another type which doesn't require you to register users up front. That may be useful for something like something where you just want to know just to have some say that they own it at a certain point in time, rather than knowing who that person is. If you wanted to pay out a dividend or reward something, or if somebody was trying to claim, for example, token or something along those lines. So the category-based restrictions perhaps might be a bit simple for some use cases. So we actually support the ability to plug in your own API into the authorization process. So what that enables you to do is provide an endpoint that AMP will call whenever it receives information from Green that somebody's trying to transact on one of your assets. And we'll send all that information over to your API, and you can make a decision on whether to allow the transaction through or not. Now, this has been used in one of the case studies that I'm going to go through later, so I'll leave the details of that for the moment. You also have the ability to freeze transactions or not. It's up to you how you configure it. An example of when you might want to do that is if you were trying to pause at a point in time or transactions to calculate a dividend payout, or let's say that a user had lost access to their wallet and they wanted to have a new wallet with the new tokens sent to that wallet. You could simply freeze the existing new tokens for that user, and then if ever they tried to transact from that wallet, let's say that they found the keys again in the future, they wouldn't be able to because you've already frozen them and issued them new. So there's some of the features there of how the issuer can control the asset. So keeping track of ownership is done through Blockstream Green IDs. If I've got time later, I'll show you within Blockstream Green desktop app. Each account within there has its own Green account ID or GAID. And this is what's used to track ownership and to restrict transfers, if applicable, between users. This is something that's unique to each user. And if you get a new address, Blockstream will know that this user address is tied to that particular Green account ID. And that's where all the reporting hangs off, essentially. Now, if what you've issued, let's say a security token, you need to attach KYC to that, that's actually done, that would be done on the issuer's end. So you'd collect the KYC information, and then you'd create an entry for that user in Blockstream AMP, which is just purely their Green account ID, and use that to tie both of the entities together. So the reporting that you're able to do is quite detailed. It enables you to show who held what at a certain point in time, enables you to see, by a Green ID who owns which of your assets, check balances, circulating supply, all these kind of things, so that you can pull out all information about your user base and, as I said, pay out rewards or things as need be. So vesting and dividends is something that's recently been added. We have the idea that the concept that if you want to, you can assign tokens which vest over time. So you could assign 100 tokens to Bob, let's say, and have them assigned 10 a month or 10 a year or what have you. And Blockstream then handles that. Now, these actually won't be sent out onto the network over the Liquid network to Bob until they have vested in each period. But they have been allocated to him so that you don't end up over allocating how many assets are provided to each of your investors. You can also record dividend payments to each user. So the example I gave earlier, let's say that you had something that paid out at end yearly on a certain date and time. You could freeze transactions for a brief moment while you got a snapshot of what. You could then call AMP for each one of those green account IDs and get a new address, which you could then deposit, let's say, Liquid Bitcoin or USDT or something like that over the Liquid network to pay them a dividend for holding that asset at that point in time. That's all done at the actual sending of things that aren't Blockstream AMP assets are done outside of AMP. So you do that over the normal Liquid network using the addresses that AMP provided. But then you can record the dividend transaction data against Blockstream AMP, against that particular investor or user. So you've kept all that in location, as it were. So the user's data is safe in that the confidential, all the transactions at the end of the blockchain are covered by Liquid's confidential transaction technology, which cryptographically hides not just the amount of assets that the investors or users are sending between each other, but also the type of asset that's being sent as well. And you do have the ability in Liquid to should you want to, should the investors want to disclose the amounts that they hold of an asset, if there's a requirement for each individual investor to do that, let's say, they do have the ability to disclose this information should they want to a third party. Right, so I did mention before there are two types of token. I've hinted at them as I've through basically. There's the issuer tracked assets and transfer restricted assets. So issuer tracked assets are perhaps a bit more simple. They're freely transferable assets that enable the issuer to report on ownership. And the examples are stablecoins, gold-backed tokens. They're things where it doesn't matter who holds it, in that the issuer won't restrict who holds it, but the issuer will to see which green account ID holds what. They may not know who that person is, who the holder is, but they know the green account ID, so they can see how much each person owns at a particular point in time. As I said, if they need to redeem that, if you redeem a gold-backed token for actual gold from the vault, or if you are due a reward payout or something along those lines. And then we have the transfer restricted assets. So these are more applicable for security tokens or digital bonds, and they're tracked assets with this category-based ownership control on top, so that the actual person who receives the asset has to be registered, has to have their green account ID registered against Blockstream AMP before they can actually hold the asset. Both types of these assets can be integrated with your own API for custom logic. Category associations alone are a bit restrictive. And as I said, we'll take a look at a real-world example of where that's been used to provide finer grain control later. As I mentioned before, the actual users or investors who hold these assets, because of the nature of the multi-signature, the ownership tracing and potential restriction of ownership, they have to hold the asset in a Blockstream green wallet. So that could be the desktop, mobile versions. You can see that we've got a lot of those there for Windows, Mac, Linux, and what have you. But there's also the GDK, the Green Development Kit, which allows you to actually either build your own wallet should you want to, or an investor could use GDK to programmatically create a wallet and receive and transact assets on a server or on their own desktop, for example. We'll take a quick look later. So it provides a bit more flexibility there for options that the issuer has. That the owners have. Right, so I mentioned earlier about the KYC element, that if you were issuing a security token and you needed to collect KYC information, you, as the issuer, may not want to do that yourself. You may want to pass that on to a third party. So examples of TokenSoft and Stocker here. There, Stocker are working on behalf of an asset issuer, collect the registered investor details, perform KYC. Once they have all that and they've collected the green account ID from each of their investors, they then upload that to Blockstream AMP on behalf of the issuer. So we have different levels of account access. So they're the issuers, the actual main accuser, and they can delegate the creation of registered users or investors in this case within Blockstream AMP to somebody else. So in this case, Stocker. So that's an interesting case there that we have already working with companies who are doing the KYC on behalf of asset issuers to set the process for them. But all the control of the actual asset ownership resides with the actual issuer. So I probably should have explained earlier, but basically when you issue an asset with Blockstream AMP, you make an API call and Blockstream AMP will issue the asset over the Liquid network direct to the address that's provided by the asset issuer. So that will basically be their Liquid node, which they'll provide addresses from. So they'll suddenly see that appear within their wallet. The issuer will. They'll see the asset that they've issued in their wallet. From that point on, they have control over the distribution of it to investors, the reissuance, and any burn or destroying the asset. So here's an interesting case study. This uses this does actually use the registered users type of asset, and this is the Bermudan token pilot, which is run by Stablehouse. So what they wanted to do was basically provide on behalf of the Bermudan government to issue a token which was spendable only in particular merchants to help out with issue stimulus during the COVID-19 situation. So what they basically did was they issued this token. They collected information on the recipients of this, and they distributed it using Blockstream AMP. All the recipients received it to their green mobile phone wallets. They couldn't then send that between each other, and they couldn't spend it wherever they liked. They could only spend it in certain merchants that provided, that sold food and this, that, and the other. Now, this is interesting because they used the custom authorization logic. The model that they had didn't fit in with the category-based ownership restrictions. So they actually used the override rule. We'll just take a look at that at the moment. And they also used BTC Pay Server, which is integrated with on these M5 stack devices. So this is what the merchants use to actually receive payment, and the user goes in, scans a QR code with their phone, ping it, sent over the Liquid network. And because of the nature of Liquid transactions, that's confirmed and final within a minute or two. No risk of chain split or double spends or what have you. So this is the essential setup. If we start in this green block down here, the registered users wallet. I'll just try and explain how this process works and how AMP works with Liquid and Green. So starting down here in this registered users wallet, by this point, the issuer would have already distributed the token over the Liquid network. It would have appeared in the users Blockstream Green wallet. So let's say that they go into one of the approved merchants. And they ping the QR code that the merchant showed them to buy something here. That gets sent back to the Blockstream Green server. Green notices that the asset being sent is one that's managed by Blockstream AMP. It passes transaction details over to Blockstream AMP. Now, Blockstream AMP goes through its own process first to make sure that the recipient is one that's an approved recipient. But then it notices that that particular asset, the issuer has specified their own API to or for authorization. So it passes the details on to the issuer's authorization endpoint. The issuer then decides whether that transaction is okay or not, approve or reject, back to Blockstream AMP, which passes the result to Blockstream Green, which then either rejects or co-signs and broadcasts the transaction, and the merchant would receive it. If the user is trying to send it to another user, which isn't allowed in this scenario, it would have been rejected at steps 2 and 3. And the user would have received a message saying, sorry, that's unauthorized transfer of this particular asset. So another case, and by the way, these are on the docs.blockstream.com website underneath Blockstream AMP in a lot more detail. This was a profit share of digital equity in the upcoming video game Infinite Fleet, and here they used Stocker to actually manage the registration of interest investors, distribute the token over the network, and then the profit shares recorded through AMP after certain points in time when the profits are due to be paid. As I mentioned earlier, the ability to pull out dividend due reports from Blockstream AMP. Again, more details of that are on our docs website. And that's a setup there, which is essentially exactly the same, but they can just use category based. They aren't plugging their own specialized API authorization service in there. So that's the end of this of the slides. So I'll go through a few of these resources that we have here. So the main point of the main point of there we go. The main point of information for Blockstream AMP is this docs.blockstream.com, where you'll find this Blockstream AMP section here. Now, there's quite a lot of information in here. It basically gives you an overview of Blockstream AMP, tells you how you can obtain a token to sign onto the beta network. Features and benefits, many of which I've probably already gone through. It has details of how the assets are tracked, how the transfer override functions work. So that was the categorization I mentioned earlier, or your specification of your own API. And then it details how the 2 different types of asset, either transfer restricted or issuer tracked. Has some details about useful liquid terms, such as what is asset issuance and what have you. There's a lot more details in here: transfer restricted assets, treasury balances, distributions, assignments. I haven't gone into all the details because it would have gone on for quite a while. And also the issuer tracked assets I mentioned, where you don't need to register the user. Details of how the vesting and dividends and rewards can work through this. There's a few worked examples close to the end of this somewhere. As I said, there's a lot of information here. And then perhaps of more immediate use is case studies. So details on the actual two case studies that I've just gone through. And then we've got the API tutorial. So this is a Python, this is written in Python. It's very simple to use the API. You basically authenticate against the server, and then you call various API endpoints to create a registered user, to issue an asset, to reissue an asset, these kind of things. Now, the API specification is also on here. You're not going to be able to read that as I scroll through it here. So you can post it into an editor that can read these API specifications and present them in a more understandable way. But here you can see we've got sections to manage a registered user, to report on the user, to see what green account IDs the user has, to add a new green account ID, because your investors might have more than one wallet, for example, or the categorization I mentioned, the ability to register the assets, lock and unlock the assets, list the activities, so between users, reissuances, things like that, ownership balances, and it's quite an extensive list. But the use of this is covered from end to end within the API tutorial. And then if you have people who are users or investors who don't want to hold the asset in a desktop app or in a mobile phone, there's examples here. It's just a large Python, well, it's not that large, but a Python example which explains how to use GDK, how to create a new wallet mnemonic, how to sign in with that, how to get the balance, how to turn on two-factor authentication so that all spends are covered by 2FA. Yeah, and how to perform things like getting a new address and send it. So I won't go into this in any detail because there's quite a lot of it. But basically, this would allow you to sort of programmatically use these AMP assets on a server or existing service that you may have, but the owners themselves may have. Now we do have a demo, so amp-demo.blockstream.com. Now this is basically a website which uses that GDK, the Green Development Kit that I spoke about before. I basically issued an asset and I sent the majority of that asset to one green wallet, which is what runs behind this website. The asset can then be sent out from here. So what we've basically provided is the sort of issuer's view of the asset. So I could go in here, take a look at the assets, two assets that have been issued here. I could go in and look at the transfer restricted demo asset. And this is all calling the API in the background here. And I can see these users and these green account IDs hold this much of the asset. And then I can drill into each one of these. Oh, no, I just went back to the asset. I can view the balances, the activities. So this is a full list of the activities that have occurred with that asset, starting from the very issuance of the asset. So that was issued publicly. So that should be on the Liquid blockchain as a public set issuance. Distributions to investors occurring here. This website is actually sending these tokens out. And then the asset UTXO. So these actually where the balances actually exist. So here you can see, I'll just take this on as an example. This green account ID, GA2J, if they look in their wallet, they'll see that they own 5 of this particular asset. If you take a look at the transaction where they receive that on the Liquid blockchain, which is what the public will see, you won't be able to decipher any of this. It's covered by confidential transactions, as I said. If we pop in the details here, you're not seeing the asset or the amount anywhere. It's all hidden by the confidential nature of confidential transactions. It's only the asset issuer and the owner of this particular wallet that can actually see the balance that's held at any point in time. These are probably the primary places to go and find out more about AMP. I'm also, as I said, I'm Matthew Haywood, and you can also get in touch with me should you want a demo account setting up, and I can send you some of the examples, although most of them have now migrated onto our Docs website, which is the best place to start. And it also has you can contact here how to obtain an API access token if you want to start testing. All our examples are in Python. We have a few that are in Node.js, and other people have written them in C#. Anything that can basically call an API, which is every language, can be used to use the Blockstream AMP API. That's all I had. Are there any questions? I can see that Dan has already posted very helpfully the links to the Docs website and the demo site. The demo site I didn't show actually, that you can, if you have, bear with me a second here. If I power up my green desktop app here, sign in. I should cover this really. If you already created a Liquid within your green desktop or mobile wallet, you can basically add a new account, managed assets account. Just call that AMP. Great. Okay. Now this green account ID here is what the user needs to provide if it's a managed asset, so one where the ownership is restricted. So if I try to receive to this address now, because I haven't registered that address, so that green account ID, if I try to receive some of the transfer restricted assets, I wouldn't be able to. So what I first have to do is register as a user, Now, again, this is just calling the API in the background here, so that would have created a user. Bear with. Okay, then that's always bound to happen in the demos. I'm not sure what's happening there. This is a new, perhaps this. Oh, it's the address I was trying to send it to. That's fine. I needed the green account ID. I do apologize. Copy that to clipboard. There we go. So I'm actually registering the green account ID. Okay, so the green account ID has been added. The user name is just made up of the first few characters just for the sake of this demo. Now I can receive the asset. Copy that address there. And send that to the address, and I should see that pop up here. There it is. So it's received some of the TRDA, the named asset there. Now, the reason why that's turned up as a named asset here is that we got liquid Bitcoin in now, obviously that named asset, and we got the transfer restricted demo asset. So that's actually registered on the Blockstream liquid asset registry, which I can quickly show you here. So one thing you can do as well with AMP is register the asset. So this has been registered, the issue domain of blockstream.com. On blockstream.com, there is a file which was linked to the actual proof of issuance on the Liquid network, and we have a service that ties the two together to make sure that whoever issued it is actually the person who controls the domain. This is to stop people from pretending to issue an asset on your behalf when it actually wasn't you. And it also then shows up in things like Green Mobile and Desktop as a properly named asset with a ticker and who issued it, and its own asset ID and these icons here. So we've got the liquid Bitcoin, and then the transfer restricted one is this little tick box, and we've got another one for the other ones. If you register your own assets, you can register them on Blockstream asset registry, and they show up here and in the wallet as known, confirmed as being issued by whoever controls the relevant domain. That's all I can think of. If you've got any questions, I don't know if we did have any in there, or if you've got any to ask now. I see somebody's typing now. Sorry, I have to type, and I didn't know if we could. Yes, you do. You do need LBTC to make the transactions. Yes, so that's a good point. So if you send the asset out to your investors, if they want to send it on to somebody else, they will need LBTC. Yeah. And now it's I think it's 0.1 sats per VByte per average transaction. So I'm looking here actually. So the amount that you need is actually very small because the nature of Liquid with its fast 1 minute block times. The fees are very low at the moment. Well, they're very low, and but they will need LBTC in order to do that. Yes, that's a good point. Yeah. Oh, thank you very much, sir. Yeah, try out GDK. Yeah, I would. It's as I said, start here with the GDK example. This is newly added. It should be very easy to follow. And it covers everything from setting the wallet up, or you could use your own 24-word mnemonic. It shows you how to create the wallet with two-factor authentication enabled, how to sign in with a PIN, which actually encrypts the mnemonic as on your machine, how to get a new address, how to transact the asset between addresses. It's all quite hopefully self-explanatory and detailed in here. There's quite a lot of annotation in here. So, but if you do have any questions on this, you can let us know through the Blockstream Docs site. But hopefully that yeah is useful, especially for people who want to programmatically process these assets like like we do through the demo site here. The demo site doesn't do a huge deal, but it just demonstrates some of the views that the issuer has over the assets. Can they still benefit benefit asset registry if you use GDK instead of green? Yeah, so just to explain, can you still? That's a good point. No, in that case, you use GDK, you'd get back the asset ID, and then you'd probably have to perform a lookup. You can perform a lookup against the Blockstream asset registry using an API for the Blockstream asset registry. But no, because it's just programmatic, you basically just get back the ticker. Sorry, you just get back the asset ID using GDK, and then you could ping that off, which is the mobile and desktop apps are doing, and ping off to the registry to get information from the actual registry. So in here, if I just go to liquid assets, these are all the registered assets basically. Now we've got API, the Explorer API, which allows you to go off and get the details for each one of each asset that you receive, so you can check. And if I look in here, so we should have our Blockstream.com. That was so a Blockstream T-shirt. That's another asset that we've obviously issued there. Hoodie hat. Oh, this could go on for issuer track demo asset. There we go. And then someone else would be the. I'm not going to go through all of them. We've got a transfer restricted demo asset. There we go. So that A28 should be the asset that we've got in here. A28 there. So use the asset ID to look that up in the API and get all the details. So you can actually validate who it was that did this. And then on Blockstream.com, there's a file I temporarily forget the location of, which proves the issuance of this particular asset was indeed done by the owner of Blockstream.com. Hop back to the chat thing there. Are dividend payments confidential too? If they're made over liquid, yes. So let's say that everybody in this owned 100 of these assets in a particular point in time, wanted to pause transactions so that there's none caught halfway through me calculating it. For example, I pull back all the ownership data. I know that G26, blah, 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 account ID owns 100, GA42, blah, blah, green account ID owns some as well. I then ping Blockstream AMP and get new for each of those green accounts, and I can then send, for example, liquid BTC over the liquid network outside of Blockstream AMP. It will benefit from confidential transactions, the amount being sent, as well as the asset that's being sent. And then you just record the result of that in AMP if you want to. You could just put a transaction ID in, you could just put an amount in. It doesn't matter what you do. It's a free table. It's literally just somewhere for convenience. If you want to record that the payment was made, you may do that. You may well do that in your own system, AMP, just for facilitates the ability to calculate what you need to pay people. But yes, to answer the question, if they're payments that are done over the liquid network, they will be confidential. Yes. It doesn't matter what asset you paid in, USDT or LBTC. Okay, are there any other questions? Happy to answer some more if you want. Oh, can AMP be configured to work with GDK 1 of 1 wallets? No, it can't. At the moment, it's got to be 2 of 2. And the reason being the owner of the wallet will sign the transaction to broadcast it. That then go to the server in order to be checked, and it will only co-sign the transaction if the rules for that particular transaction are, are allowed, as it were, whether that's the rules within AMP or the rules within the issuer's own API. Can I see any more questions in there? Don't think so. Somebody's typed in. I'll just wait for Scott to, looks like Scott's asking a question. Scott could just be pressing the space bar and then delete those, so it looks like he's typing. Oh, could it be configured so a third party validates who come into the registry? I'm not entirely sure what you mean by who comes into the registry. You could, the API endpoint, if you're talking about the transaction that I showed in this slide here, this section here, this could be any API. It doesn't have to be owned by the issuer. It could be, they could outsource that if they wanted, or to a third party in order to actually validate the transaction. What the transaction detail will contain is the amount, the asset, the destination, and yeah, the issuer could then make a decision on them. So it gives them all the information that AMP has, and then they may hold their own information about those investors side of AMP, like I said, with the Bermudian token, whereby they only allow it to a small number of merchants. I wasn't sure if that was what you're asking there. Oh, i.e., if I had a KYC solution to determine who can hold AMP assets, would I be able to determine who can transfer? Yes, and if I have a KYC solution to determine who can hold, would I be able to determine who can transfer? Yes. Basically, the way that the two maps, you've got your own existing system where all the KYC information is held. You just need to create an investor record or registered user record within AMP for each of those. Then record, let's say that we generate our own unique ID within AMP. You'll get back an ID of 587 for a particular user, as it were. You just need to store that your end, so you know which issuer, which investor that is, and then within AMP we'll have the green account ID in there. So yeah, you tie the two systems together. You just need to be able to add a reference field to your existing KYC solution, as it were. And then for the, let's say you had 100 out of your 1,000 investors you wanted to allow to hold the asset, you just ping off a request to create 100 registered user codes within AMP, and then from that moment on, the asset can only be transacted between those 100 users that you've created. Hope that answers that. Just see if Scott's got one more follow-up question, and then we'll head to wrap it up. You can contact me on Twitter as well if you want. Okay, cheers. Yep, thanks, Scott. Quite happy if anybody wanted to message me on Twitter. I'll give you my Blockstream email address. Actually, it's the best bit, isn't it? So it's just simply. Can I type that right? I don't even know why I'm bothered typing it. It's Matthew@blockstream.com. I'd have just looking through the docs first, but then I can really want any more questions answered, or if you want an API access key of a beta server, although the beta server, the apps that are issued transactions actually go over the live Liquid network. The reason being, we don't have a test network for green, but you don't have to pay to issue the app, because I'm issuing it back to your wallet with transaction fees on there. So you can issue an asset to yourself, and then as long as you've got a little bit of LBTC, you can ping it around and test how it all works. So I'll wrap up there. If there's no more questions, if you have, as I said, email me. But otherwise, thank you very much for your time. I hope that was a teaser. Thank you very much. And thank you, Daniel, for setting all this up as well. Thanks, everyone.